Good afternoon, everybody. This is Carolyn Collins again with the U.S. Department of Education. Thank you for joining us for today's Language Resource Center Technical Assistance webinar. I'm going to pass the mic over to Sarah Beaton, who is the Director of our Advanced Training and Research Division, for a quick introduction, and then I will take it from there.
Thank you, Carolyn, and good afternoon, Language Resource Center Directors and Associate Directors. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for the Technical Assistance webinar. My vision for the Advanced Training and Research Division is to highlight how the Title VI programs can contribute to providing a globally competent workforce in areas important to our national security, economic competitiveness, and global engagement. The research, training, dissemination of new and improved teaching methods, including educational technology, and the assessment of those methods at your centers help respond to the growing national need for expertise and competence in foreign languages, including languages of critical importance to our national security. I'm very pleased to work with Carolyn Collins, your program officer, who's going to deliver this technical assistance webinar this afternoon. I look forward to getting to know you and appreciate the work that you do. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. So I see today that we've got a great group on the line. I think almost all the centers are represented here. So this webinar is going to be a little bit different than some of our other ones. I'd like it to be a time where we can go over some of the technical questions and issues that might arise with LRC. But I also wanted us to have an opportunity to connect, in a more informal discussion. I know that the LRC community is a small but mighty community. There are 16 centers, 3 of whom are new to the program this grant cycle. So after our main presentation, which will go through logistics and technical assistance questions, there will be time for general Q&A, and at that time I thought we might also try opening it up to discussion or sharing best practices. So to that effect, we may have you guys unmute phones and kind of chime in, through talking rather than just typing in the chat box later, but we'll just see how it goes. We'll play it by ear. Without further ado, we'll get going. So in today's technical assistance webinar, what we're going to cover is, as I mentioned, our community of LRCs, resources that will be useful to you as you administer these grants, IRIS reporting questions and requests, budget questions, internal controls, no cost extensions and closeout, how to share your story, and then time, as I mentioned, for Q&A and discussion. So here's a quick little image. I think you all are well aware of who else is part of the program, and you guys have a great joint website with nslrc.org. But just in case, here's a map of where all of our LRCs are and the logos. If you could give me a second, I'm going to respond to one of our issues about audio in the chat box. So thank you for your patience. Okay, so we'll keep going. As I mentioned, so we have 16 centers. The centers whose logos are outlined in yellow are our new centers, so we'd like to welcome them to the program, to the grantee community. So that's University of Utah, the Second Language Teaching and Research Center. We have Kansas with their Open Language Resource Center, And we have Pearl at University of Maryland with a focus on professional development. And then, of course, we have our returning champions, the remaining 13 centers, who we're very happy to have again in the program for 2018 to 2021. Okay, so we'll keep going. This is just a broad overview, just for the centers who may be new. It's just kind of a refresher on what the legislation or what the regulations say is the purpose of the LRC program. So these are the activities that are actually written into the regulations. These are all of the different things that LRCs are mandated to do. So the only requirement is effective dissemination efforts, but of course, all of you are also doing lots of activities on research methods, development of new language materials, development and dissemination of performance testing. Teacher training is a big one, of course. Work with our less commonly taught languages. And then, of course, resource materials for K through 12 teachers and summer institutes. So that's just a refresher. Same thing with the competitive preference priorities. Just a refresher that for this round, the priorities changed just a little bit. In the last grant cycle, there was an invitational priority, and there was a priority regarding heritage language learning. For this cycle, those were not included. This cycle's competitive preference priorities were simplified to just be for LICTLs. So again, activities focusing on languages other than French, German, and Spanish. And then, of course, our MSI and community college collaborations, which are a broader priority of IFLE. Many of our grant programs include that priority. So that's something that I think the department and the Office of Post-Secondary Education more broadly is really focused on. So in terms of resources, I know you all are, obviously we're already basically a year into the grant. You've been doing this for a year already, so you know most of this, but in case you ever need that reference, you have the legislation, which is, of course, from the Higher Education Act of 1965, which was amended and reauthorized in 2008. You have the U.S. Code sections. You have the Code of Federal Regulations. Then you have EDGAR, which is our Education Department General Administrative Regulations. And a lot of what used to be directed by EDGAR has now been replaced and streamlined with the Uniform Guidance, which is, so if I ever email you with an answer referring to the Uniform Guidance, what that is this new compilation of administrative requirements that came out a few years ago. It's called Uniform Administrative Requirements, Cost Principles, and Audit Requirements. And that's 2 CFR 200. So a lot of questions regarding what you can and cannot pay for with federal grant money is very clearly outlined in the Uniform Guidance. So if you're ever wondering, can grant money be used to pay for food? You go in there and you see grant money cannot be used to pay for food and beverage, and it's very clearly stated there. So yeah, you can Google it all. The Uniform Guidance is online, and I actually have a link later in the presentation to that. So many of your questions can be answered there. I also wanted to mention that we're recording this session, and I will also email the slide deck, a copy of the slide deck, to you after we're done. So if you want to review the slides again, or if you have other staff members who are not able to attend today who you think might benefit from attending the webinar, we'll be sending the link and the slide deck out later this afternoon, hopefully, or worst case scenario, tomorrow morning. Then further resources, you have your Federal Register notices, the U.S. Department of Education's Office of General Counsel. Sometimes, I haven't experienced this with the LRCs, but sometimes when we have a grant question that's really tricky and we don't know how to answer it, we'll go to the Office of General Counsel and get official legal advice on, on what's an appropriate use of grant money, et cetera. But usually we don't have to take it up the food chain. Then, of course, we have the Program Administrative Manual. I sent that out by email last week. Thank you all for your patience in waiting for that. I know you had been working on an old version from last grant cycle, but luckily none of the legislation or regulations have changed. So it's basically the same information, just in an updated package. But you should all have that now. Again, that's a reference for you as you do this grant work. But if anything is not in there, or it's not clear to you, of course, as your program officer, I'm also here to answer questions. So on the subject of grant administration and the Program Administrative Manual, you can find information about travel approval requests in there. A lot of the questions that our centers have are relating to how to use federal funding to support travel. LRC funds may be used to cover the airfare, hotels, meals, and incidentals for participants in LRC activities. So sometimes you guys will need to submit these travel approval requests, or TARs as we like to call them, in IRIS. You don't have to submit them for domestic travel. So for instance, if LRC funds are being used to support a faculty member at your university to go to a particular conference, or to go and help out a language institute in another area of the country, and it's just domestic travel, we do not need to receive a TAR for that. On the other hand, if you are planning to travel abroad, or if you are planning to bring someone from abroad to the United States for an LRC activity, you do need to submit a TAR to us in IRIS. We ask that you do that at least 30 days before the date of the departure, and that allows us enough time to review the request. If something isn't clear, or if we need you to make revisions in order to be compliant with various regulations, that gives us the time to do that and to work with you and get it approved before the travel. But of course, if ever you have travel that is tighter than that 30-day time frame, I would ask that you just send me an email to let me know that you're coming in under that 30 days, but could I still look at it? We can't make guarantees then, but the large majority of the time, I'm happy to look at it as soon as I can and get back to you. With travel, as I mentioned, using federal funds to pay for travel comes with some rules. Travel expenses must comply with per diem rates for lodging and meals and incidentals. These are set by different authorities depending on where the travel is taking place. So if the travel, if the lodging and meals and incidentals is taking place in the contiguous United States, it's the Government Services Administration, GSA, that sets those meals and incidental rates. If it's travel to Alaska, Hawaii, or the U.S. territories, those rates are set by the U.S. Department of Defense. And if it's travel overseas, the rates are set by U.S. Department of State. And the links to those per diem, web pages that'll outline all the details, those are contained in the Program Administrative Manual. So, so you should already have those links if you need to do this. Also, flight itineraries that are paid for with federal funds must comply with the Fly America Act and/or an Open Skies Agreement. So this just means that if federal funds are being used to pay for a flight, if an American airline is available, you should take the American airline, or if an airline from the EU, for instance, is available, that's okay because the EU, European Union, has an agreement with the United States to basically allow federal funds to be used for flights purchased on an Air France or a British Airways. Similarly, there are open skies agreements with Japan, Australia, and Switzerland. Those are a little bit different. Those depend on city pairs. It's a little bit complicated. So if you ever are in a situation where you want to purchase an airfare on, on a Japanese air carrier or on on Qantas or an Australian, Swiss, or Japanese airline, I refer you to the Program Administrative Manual where we have outlined, I hope clearly, how those work. But again, if you ever have questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to advise you on that. Another note on TARS is we ask you to itemize. It's not enough for us just to see the lump sum. For instance, we want to use $2,082 to cover this traveler's airfare, meals, and lodging. That won't work for us. We're going to disapprove that TAR, send it back to you, and ask for more details because we need to see exactly how much is going for lodging, exactly how much is going for meals and incidentals, and where that is taking place. So that we can verify compliance with the meals and incidentals that are set by whichever authority applies. So in this example, where the traveler is going to Beijing, if you can break it out, how many nights hotel, in what location, and what is the nightly rate, that allows us to do our job more easily and more quickly and get that approval for you, sooner rather than later. And the final note, we don't do retroactive approval, so it's really important for you to get these travel approval requests submitted to us before the travel takes place, and that way we can work with you on any issues we see. If a travel approval request comes in late, we really can't do anything about that. Okay, so now moving on to reporting. This is something I know many of you always have concerns about or a little question here or there. So this is a general reporting schedule. As you see, there are 7 reports that you'll have to do for the LRC grant over the 4 years. It's basically 2 per year, but in the last year, there's no interim report. Because basically the grant's being closed out. By that point, we have a very good understanding of what the grant is doing and what projects are underway. So we really only need the final end of grant report in year 4. So it's 2 reports per year. The interim report, which is basically a mid-year check-in, is due in the spring. You guys have already done that for year 1. The end of year report is due every fall on October 15th, and that's the report that's coming up next week. So I've already received a few questions regarding that, and that's fine. If you're working on the report and you aren't sure how to fill something out, feel free to reach out to me. But in general, you guys do a great job. I don't really have issues with your reports. And the performance measures are, of course, an area of concern for many centers. One question I got recently was if something could be modified on a performance measure now that the grant's underway and maybe the language wasn't exactly right in terms of how you were referring to a particular project activity. That's okay if you come across if you're in that situation, just let me know. We can unsubmit the performance report, or excuse me, the performance measure that has already been approved. Basically, just let me know which one you want to modify. I can unsubmit it for you. You can edit whatever word or target that you need to make a change to, and then resubmit it. But I encourage you, do that now if you need to do it at all, because as we go forward in the grant, it's going to be more, I guess, onerous to do that kind of revision. Anytime we revise a performance measure, all of the reports that have been submitted using that performance measure have to be unsubmitted and then resubmitted. So at this point, it's not too much of a hassle. You've only submitted one report, but obviously if you did that in year 4, it would be a real hassle for everybody. So just let me know if you need to make any revisions on your performance measures, and we can make that happen. Another question that comes in a lot is regarding the budget. I think that IRIS is maybe not as clear as it could be on exactly what exact budget you're submitting on each report. So to clarify, on the spring report, that's when you send me your proposed budget for the next year. So on your spring report from year 1, the one that you submitted in April, I was looking to receive your year 2 proposed budget. And I think I followed up with a few of you to get that proposed budget. And that's okay to get it by email as well. But in theory, the budget should be submitted on the report. On the fall report, that's the end of the year report. So that's the report where you can submit your actuals budget of what you actually spent during year 1. So I hope that helps clarify and answer some questions that you might have had. In terms of budget revisions, we understand that as your project gets underway, certain revisions might be necessary. You might find out that a certain activity isn't as easy as you thought it was going to be to get underway, and you want to make an adjustment. That's fine, and there's a process for that. Anytime you move money between categories, it's a best practice to let us know. But the official rules state that you have to get prior approval for budget revisions or revisions of your program plan in any of the following cases: a change in project scope or objectives, a change in key project personnel, if there's no project director for 90 days, and or if you want to transfer funds that were budgeted for participant support costs to other categories of expense. Anytime there's a question on whether or not you need to get a budget approved by me, I always default to just send it my way. I'll take a look. If everything looks normal, I'll approve it, and that way we don't have to wonder. This 10% rule is also something to keep in mind. Anytime a grant is larger than $100,000, the government requires that grantees request and obtain prior approval to make changes of moving money between categories if it's larger than 10%. That 10% is cumulative. So if you make one adjustment that totals about 3% of the grant, then you make another that totals 6% of the grant, now you're up to 9%. The next time you want to make a shift, if it's about 2% of the grant, you need to ask me, because at that point you're hitting that 10% transfer limit, and we'll want to see the prior approval. But again, as I said, it can be a pain to figure all that out. And if you're ever in doubt, just email me. I'll take a look, and I can approve it, save it to the grant file, and that way we know that all of the T's have been crossed and the I's have been dotted. Okay, so another question I get from time to time is regarding program income. And I know that especially with our new grantees this cycle, many of you are probably curious to know more about if the LRC can take in money, and if so, what to do with that money. So LRCs are allowed to generate program income, but there are specific rules and guidelines that you have to follow if you do that. This is outlined in the uniform guidance. The link is here. Again, I'm going to be emailing the slide deck, so you don't have to write down this horrible link. and you'll be able to just click directly from the PDF. The easiest way to handle program income is through the addition method, which is basically just putting the money you make back into grant activities. So if you make $1,000 off of selling, off of selling tickets or something, or textbooks, if you just put that back into an activity that's written into your LRC grant, then you have more money for that, and there aren't any issues regarding, regarding government grant funding generating program income. So take a look at the uniform guidance. If you have questions beyond that, I would recommend that you get in touch with your office's sponsored projects, because they probably have seen that kind of thing before and may also have additional guidance for you. Okay, in terms of finances, the Office of the Chief Financial Officer at the Department of Education sends a report to our executive office every 4 months to notify us about grantees who've made excessive draws or who have made unusual refund requests. This is just a fiscal accountability measure and a risk management measure. Anytime one of these transactions gets flagged for us, we have to follow up with the grantee to get an explanation. There's usually a very good explanation, that makes sense. So if and when this happens, I will shoot you an email saying this transaction was flagged. It was for this amount of money on this date. Can you please let us know what this is? If you just email me back with the explanation, that's usually enough to close out the inquiry. The mention of excessive draws, that means excessive drawdown, which is defined as either 50% or more of the grant in the first quarter, 80% or more in the second quarter, or 100% of the cash in the third quarter of the budget period. The budget periods for the LRC program are yearly, so each budget period is each fiscal year. It's a 4-year grant, but the 4-year grant is made up of 4 budget periods. So, so that's good to know when thinking about just your drawdown rate, if that ever gets flagged. Internal controls are really important. This is your responsibility as a grantee to have, to have a process and a plan that provides assurance regarding the achievement of objectives like effectiveness and efficiency of operations, reliability of reporting for internal and external use, and compliance with applicable laws and regulations. Internal controls are basically all the things that you do to ensure that what is supposed to happen does happen, and what should not happen does not happen. So if you ever are graced with a site visit, this is something we would be looking at. We basically, just want to make sure you have the internal processes in place to ensure proper management of federal funds. Okay, we have about 5 more slides, so bear with me. It's a little early to be thinking about this, but I wanted to put it on your radar. LRCs are one of the programs that can ask for a one-time no-cost extension of up to 12 months after the award's end date. So this means that, if you get to the end of year 4 and you still have a certain amount of money left that you would like to use to continue the specific LRC activities that are in your 2018 to 2021 budget, you can get an extension of up to 12 months. To do that, you have to submit a request in IRIS to explain why you need the extension and to provide us with a new end date. No-cost extensions have to be requested in IRIS at least 10 days before the end of year 4. So this grant cycle ends on August 14th, 2022. So extension requests have to be submitted before August 4th, 2022. You can do that request much further in advance. Several months before is fine, and we can look at that and approve it, and then you don't have to worry about making that, that date. But it's really important that you know about this, because if you don't request the extension in time, we simply cannot approve an extension for you. So you're out of luck. If you submit the extension request on August 5th, we'll say, we're really sorry. You know, we hate to see that $40,000 go back to Treasury, but we simply cannot do extensions after that cutoff date. So so hopefully you'll have your money spent down by the end of year 4. But if you do have money left over, just know that it's a possibility to extend the grant performance period by up to 12 months in order to spend down most of or all of those remaining funds. The worst thing that we see is a lot of money going back to the Treasury. So we want to encourage everybody to spend all of their money or as much of their money as they can. Again, it's pretty early to be thinking about this, but closeout is the thing that will happen in 2022 or even 2023, after the performance period is done. When the grant is over, we will require you to submit your final performance report along with your final federal financial report. You can send those in IRIS. If you have more than 10% of grant funding left at the end of the grant, we will follow up with you to ask you to explain why that amount is left over. And that's one of the reasons why it's better to spend all your money or get an extension to spend all your money. So again, with closeout, as you work with us to do this, we may refer to some terminology. Basically, there are different closeout statuses in G5. Liquidation is considered the period of 90 days after the official end date of the grant. That's the time when you can submit your final reports and make final drawdowns. You can draw down money for obligations that were made prior to the end date, but haven't been drawn down yet. You can't make drawdowns for things that were obligated after the grant date, because that's after the end of the grant. Suspension goes for an additional 6 months after the liquidation period. That's the time when you can still make online adjustments to your financial data, but you can't draw down funds. And these things might be of more concern to your financial office or your office of sponsored projects, but it's good for everyone to know what the terminology is. And then manual closeout, this is usually what happens where if there are any funds left on the grant or if there are any reports missing, we will coordinate with you directly to resolve any issues. And so my wonderful colleague, Monet Peterson-Cox, she's the closeout guru in our office. So, when it's time to close out the grants, it'll be Monet and me working with you to get all of this in order. Okay, finally, we wanted to remind you that it's good to do all this work, but it's great to do all this work and have people know about it. So whenever you have an impact story, a success story, or just something that you want to share with our office and or the broader public, feel free to send me those stories. There's my email address, which I think you all have anyway. What we do with those impact stories varies depending on what the story is, how long it is, what the particular subject matter is. But we do a few things. One thing, at the smallest level is I get it. It informs me on what you're doing in your center and how you're using the grant funds, and it allows me to be a better program officer and a better representative of the program within the department. I also like to share the stories with our director, Sarah Beaton, and with IFLE Senior Director, Cheryl Gibbs. They also like to know what's going on in the grantee community, and it helps them act as better representatives for the work that we all, are supporting here. Sometimes those stories are compelling enough where we also share them with the senior staff in the department, some of the political appointees to I guess, help them learn more about what our grants do, what our office does, and the importance of the work. So that's on the internal level, what we do with your stories. On the external level, we use the stories in outreach. We have a Twitter account at GoGlobalEd, and we also have our quarterly newsletter, which I believe you should all be subscribed to, where we like to feature stories from all of our grant programs. We're heavy on the National Resource Centers and Foreign Language and Area Studies Fellowship stories in that newsletter. So we always like to get stories from our programs that have fewer grantees as well, but are equally important, just like the LRCs. So shoot those stories my way. I am our office's communications, person. So I manage our Twitter account. I put together the newsletter. If you email me a story, I have the power to get it into our newsletter. So please send those my way, and please share things on your Twitter and tag us. It just helps the message go further. So on that note, that's the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, basically there are two ways we can do this. You can enter a question into the chat box in WebEx, and that works really well. But since we are a small group, I think we also might have an opportunity to open the phone line up for more discussion. If any of you have questions for each other, you want to know how another center is, how they do program income, or how they set up, if they've ever set up a memorandum of understanding, maybe we can actually open this up for more sharing of best practices. So let's go to the chat box. Can you explain the use of projects conducted and disseminated and outreach activity sections under the report data tab? Is this for additions to projects and activities listed on the performance measures reporting form? Yeah, so the IRIS report, a good way to think about it is that the IRIS reports existed before the performance measures were created. So the performance report itself is a way for us to get a log of all of your activities, your outreach and dissemination efforts. The PMFs, the performance measure forms, were added later as a way of formally tracking data in order to respond to it's GEPRA, it's the Government Performance and Results Act. So you can repeat some of the information there. If you have a performance measure that's written to encompass your outreach work, you should still list your outreach work in the main IRIS section. So projects conducted and disseminated, that's everything you're doing using LRC support in terms of, what projects you're doing. So everything and anything you wrote into your grant application, if you said in year one, we're going to start up this specific project to work on a Ukrainian textbook, put that in your projects, projects conducted and disseminated activity. If you organized a summer institute last year, put that in your outreach activities, or, we want to see that stuff in the main IRIS report section, and then, of course, respond to your PMFs however you wrote those. Everyone's PMFs are a little different. but the categories that you asked your question about, the projects conducted and disseminated and outreach activity sections, those are the same for everybody. So that's kind of how we get the broad across the program data, and the PMS can be more specific to you. How do you subscribe to the IFLE newsletter? That's a great question. You may already be subscribed because I think I added all of the email addresses that were associated with our new grantees to our list, but I am going to put in the chat box an IFLE newsletter subscription link, and you can put your email in there just to make sure. If you're already subscribed, it won't hurt. If you're not subscribed, it'll say, thank you, we've added you to the list. So I'm going to put that in right now. Okay, we have another question about IRIS. It says at one point there was a request to allow you to upload a file into the outreach section rather than entering the activities separately. Is this still being considered? That is something I will need to ask about. So thank you for bringing that to my attention. Anytime we want to make changes to IRIS, it can be a little bit onerous. First of all, because the system is, the technical setup of the system is very specific and works in mysterious ways. So some things are just not possible when we ask for them. But other times, anytime we change a form, sometimes we have to get that cleared by OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, because there's a funny government rule where if you ask the same question of more than 9 people, OMB has to approve it. So, so let me look into that, Kate. I'm not sure where that stands, but I will ask around, figure it out, and let you know. But I think for now, if you're not seeing the ability to upload it, it's not going to be there soon. So submit your fall report as it is in IRIS right now. Maybe that's something we can get added down the road. But you know, IRIS moves slowly. Okay, we have another question. So at Coral at UT Austin, they would like to know how other centers have managed royalties and have shared them with collaborators. They're also working on a memorandum of understanding for everyone they work with to sign, and are wondering if any other centers have done that. So if you want to chime in here, if anyone has an answer to this question, yeah, either add it in the chat box or feel free to unmute your phone and jump on the phone line. I think as long as we all try to just be reasonable about using the phone line, we should be okay. So I'll let you all have a minute if you want to jump on the phone line.
This is Mandy Getler from Castles. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Mandy. Yes.
Okay. So in response to Sarah's question about royalties, we have done that at Castles, and we've worked with, there's a central department at the University of Oregon that manages those kinds of activities. It's called the Innovation Partnership Services, and we've set up an agreement with the universities in which authors get individual author shares, but Castles as a department also gets a share of the royalties. So we split the royalties coming back with the folks who have worked on the project and with the department, so that some of those resources are going back into the department as well.
Okay, thanks. That's really interesting. And you said
yeah,
that
and I'm happy to share. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to ask, so it's called the Innovation Partnership?
Yeah, Innovation Partnership Services. And I'm happy to share copies of the templates that we use to do that if you have, if you want to take those to some of your central offices to have those discussions. I'd be happy to follow up and send those out to anyone who's interested.
Oh, thank you. That would be awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to chime in and say I will also send around an LRC, just the grant contact list for who's the project director and who are the associated staff at each center. Because you're a small community, I think these are the kind of things that can take place over email without it being totally obnoxious. So I will send that around with the webinar slides, with the webinar recording link, because I think, you know, that is probably a good way for you guys to connect as well. I know with our National Resource Centers, they actually have a Google group where their outreach coordinators share information. I don't know if you guys have something like that set up already. I know you have your joint website and already do a lot of work together, but in whatever way I can help as the program officer, I'm always happy to do so. Oh, okay, interesting. We have a question regarding the languages in the IRIS reports. So yeah, you have languages that you develop materials for that are not on the current list of languages in the IRIS reports. That's really interesting. I would like to talk to our IRIS contract, I guess, liaison about that, because with other grant programs, for instance, with our FLAS fellowships, we can get languages added to the system. So, so Dave, if you could email me directly with the list of languages that are not on the screens that you would like to have on the screens, send that to me by email, and I will see if we can get those added, because in theory, I think we should be able to do it, but there might be something I don't know about in this, you know, whole situation, but I think we can make that happen. So shoot me an email directly to carolyn.collins@ed.gov, and I will follow up on that. I also wanted to mention that our office was hoping to organize a Title VI project directors meeting for all of our Title VI grants earlier this year. For budgetary reasons and logistical reasons, that wasn't able to come together for 2019. We are still hoping to organize that probably for next spring. And we would like to get everyone together in person for such a meeting, and at that time, you know, we could have LRC-specific sessions where everyone can meet each other. We can all sit down and talk through this stuff, share best practices, et cetera. But for now, we're trying to, you know, put a Band-Aid on it by doing some webinars, you know, getting everyone connected over email. And as soon as we have any more information on an in-person meeting, we will let you know. Okay, will I be coming to IFLE next month? No, but I think some of the people in our office will be. Oh, maybe I will be.
This is Sarah, and Cheryl Gibbs and I are going to look into getting some passes for a few of us, including Carolyn, too. Okay. Part of the IFLE meeting, I think it's November 20th through the 22nd.
Yeah, and if I am able to go to IFLE, I think, you know, many of you go to that every year, and in that case, I can send you all an email just to let you know and maybe we can set aside a time to meet. In any case, anytime you're in Washington, D.C. for meetings or whatever the case may be, we're always happy to have you over to the department just to hear what's going on in your center, check in. So please, please reach out to me anytime you're coming to D.C. I would love to meet you all in person for those that I haven't met. And I'd love to take you around and introduce you to Sarah and Cheryl and everyone else in the office. Okay, any other questions or things that you want to talk to each other about? Okay, well, it sounds like we don't have any further questions. So in that case, we would like to thank you all again for logging on today and listening to our presentation. As I mentioned, I will send around the materials from the webinar by email. And after that, please don't hesitate to reach out if you ever have questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.